The following is a Cartoonerific Studios presentation.
Welcome to Cartoon Fun, it's Cartoonerific. Yeah! It's Cartoonerific.
Well, welcome to the Cartoonerific podcast, Classic Animated Cartoons. I am Brian Mitchell, and I am your host. Over the years, there's been many cartoon producers. Of course, the most famous, Walt Disney, Walter Lantz, the Fleischer Brothers, Leon Schlesinger, Fred Quimby, Hanna-Barbera, Friz Freleng and Dave DePatie. Filmation, you had Lou Scheimer. I mean, there's all these different I'm probably leaving out a whole bunch. Paul Turry, yikes. There's so many. And they all approached their animation or all approached the productions they were making with a certain level of quality. I mean, Paul Turry kind of considered, as long as they got a film out and it looked like things were happening on the screen, I guess he was satisfied with it. He wasn't really pushing quality as he was just trying to produce a product. But you had people like, well, Walt Disney, who, when he came in, he was looking up to people like Paul Turry or Max Fleischer. And Max Fleischer was trying to push quality. He was always trying to do things to make the cartoon better. But Walt Disney realized he was competing against that, and he was going to try to make his cartoons even better than Fleischer. So they're kind of head-to-head for a while. But Disney beat him on the sound angle and came out with Steamboat Willie and had a little bit of an edge. But what Disney did was like I said, he kept pushing the quality to the point where he was adding color to his cartoons. He was coming up with better stories, trying to come up with better draftspeople, and trying to improve the quality of the cartoon. Producers that came in the 30s, you had Harmonizing, you had Fred Quimby, and Leon Schlesinger, who basically ran a studio that did titles for films, and he ended up going into the cartoon business, having Warner Brothers distribute his films. But Leon Schlesinger came up with a workable budget, and didn't really care what his directors did as long as they turned out a funny cartoon. Now, Iwerks had left Disney. And a lot of these people had left Disney. Friz Freleng was at Disney, had Harmonizing, two guys, and they left Disney to start up their own studio. And Iwerks left, and Iwerks started his own studio. So it was you had all these people doing their own thing. Friz Freleng became part of Warner Brothers, so he wasn't really a cartoon producer, but Harmonizing were, and the same thing with Iwerks. And a lot of these studios kind of lasted, 5-10 years, if that. And then basically they either went to work for somebody else or got out of the business entirely. Iwerks got out of the business and ended up just working for Disney, and he was doing special effects for him. He was a special optical guy. He used to tinker a lot, so he would figure things out. These other cartoon producers like Fred Quimby, well, he was employed by MGM. And the thing was that MGM wanted the best. Just like Disney wanted the best, MGM wanted the best. So Fred Quimby complied with that, and he hired very good people to work for him. And, of course, you know the story. Hanna-Barbera came up with the Tom and Jerry, or the Cat and Mouse cartoon that became Tom and Jerry. But he also hired away Tex Avery from Warner Brothers. had all these cartoon producers doing different things. Now, Paul Terry was still very content just producing black and white cartoons. And it wasn't until his distributor basically told him, you need to produce your cartoons in color because everybody else is producing in color. And of course, he resisted that because he was making very good money just doing black and white cartoons. But he was kind of forced into doing that. And so, that was the reason why he went into color. And his color cartoons looked pretty good, but they were still, maybe okay, but they weren't a Disney cartoon or a Looney Tunes or an MGM cartoon. As these producers went on, you had other studios kind of come in, like Screen Gems, which hired Bob Clampett. They were only around for a couple of years. Of course, you had Walter Lantz, and Walter Lantz was always an independent studio, and so they were self-financing these cartoons, and they ran into problems here and there. So they were definitely on a lower budget than the cartoons at Warner Brothers or at Disney. Quality was important to Walter Lantz, but the thing is, the money issue kind of came in. And so he did the best that he could with the resources he had. Eventually, in the 50s, UPA came in. And UPA was all about quality too, but they weren't about doing films the way Disney was doing them. They were going to do them with a twist, and they're going to make them a little bit more stylized. Well, they came in, they did their thing, and UPA as a studio, as a theatrical studio, lasted for about 10 years, and then they kind of went out. And they were bought up, and then it kind of retooled as a TV studio, but it was a different group of people. Eventually, all the theatrical cartoons, with the exception of Lantz, which is kind of funny in a way, all those studios started closing their cartoon divisions in the late 50s. The only couple that hung on were, believe it or not, New York studios and Walter Lantz. Terry Toons ended up lasting until about the late 60s. Same thing with Paramount Famous Studios, which was, in the past, it was the Fleischer Studio. And then basically they let Max and Dave go, and that studio turned into Paramount Famous Studios, and they were doing all these cartoons out of New York. But Paramount Famous lasted until the late 60s as well. Lantz was continually producing cartoons until about 1972. The Warner Brothers Cartoon Studio wrapped up around 1963, but ended up doing new cartoons with Friz Freleng, who was let go by the studio and started up his own studio, believe it or not, in the same cartoon studio where Warner Brothers was, the Warner Brothers Cartoon Studio. And so they were there for a couple of years doing the Patty Freleng cartoons like the Pink Panther and the Ant and Aardvark and the Inspector, and so on and so forth. The Patty Freleng lasted till about 1980, so it had a good 16-year run. But the studios that were starting up in the late 50s were considered TV studios. So Hanna-Barbera, which were doing really wonderful work at the beginning, and they kept selling shows. And a lot of shows, all of a sudden, they were producing a lot of different things, which is hard to control. But they would do multiple series every year, and they had short cartoons. They were doing theatricals up until like the mid-60s. And then you had Filmation Studios, which started in the mid-1960s, and they were doing all this television stuff. So you had a couple of studios like that. J. Ward Studios, of course, was from the 50s, started in the 1950s, late 50s with Rocky and Bullwinkle. Eventually, they did some other series like George of the Jungle. Super Chicken was another show they did. And in the 1970s, not a whole lot. They ended up just doing Quaker Captain Crunch commercials, among other Quaker characters, and that studio lasted till about 1985, 86. In the 70s, there weren't a whole lot of brand new studios. There was a studio that started in Canada right about 1971, did a lot of different projects, I'm sure commercials and all that, until they did this one special called A Cosmic Christmas, and it was a cell animated show, and it was done with a lot of quality. There was it looked like it was all full animation, and they did that show. It got the attention of George Lucas, who was looking to do his Star Wars Christmas special in the late 70s. But they did a whole bunch of other animated specials like Romeo and Juliet, Devil and Daniel Mouse. Sorry, I'm tripping over my words. Take Me Up to the Ball Game, and a whole bunch of others. And eventually that led to them doing a feature film called Rock and Rule with the talents of Lou Reed and Debbie Harry and Cheap Trick. And it was a fully animated feature film. And it came out and it was geared more for teenagers, which was a bold move. The film is a cult classic, and I happened to see it in the early 80s. It was really wonderful. And then the studio ended up doing a lot of other things and creating some of the most beloved television shows or animated shows in the history of the television medium. The person we have on today is the co-founder of Nelvana. There were 3 people, and he is one of the 3. Studio has always pushed quality, and I'm so glad that we could have him on today. His name is Michael Hirsh. He has a book out about his life and creating Nelvana and working in the business, and it's called Animation Nation. And it's coming out in stores on July 23rd. It's available on Amazon, so you can pre-order it now, and they'll send it out. But anyway, he's coming up next on the Cartoonerific podcast. Stay tuned and don't go away.
You're listening to the Cartoonerific podcast, classic animated cartoons with your host animator, Brian Mitchell. And now it's time for our special Cartoonerific guest.
Well, our guest today is a Canadian producer. He's an executive entrepreneur and author. He's basically been attributed to building the Canadian animation industry from the ground up because there was really no Canadian animation, with the exception of the Film Board of Canada. It was a couple of shorts, but he co-founded Nelvana, which is probably one of the biggest studios in North America during the 80s and 90s. The shows that he's responsible for are like Little Bear, Franklin Babar, Max and Ruby, The Magic School Bus, Care Bears, The Adventures of Tintin, Inspector Gadget, Droids, Ewoks, among many, many others. He became the CEO of Cookie Jar Entertainment, which produced Arthur and Johnny Test and Strawberry Shortcake. And later, he left the company to serve as CEO and chairman of WOW Unlimited Media. So I'm really, really excited to have him on here today. Please welcome Mr. Michael Hirsh. Hi, Michael. How are you today?
Doing great, Brian. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. I consider you an amazing person because you've had 3 production companies doing animation. You've done all these wonderful shows over the years. You did this. I really love this feature film, Rock and Rule, and some of the early stuff, some of the great animation that you did for TV, like A Cosmic Christmas and Romeo and Juliet and the Devil and Daniel Mouse and all these wonderful things. How did you start? Where are you from?
Well, I'm from Toronto, but I was born in Belgium and came to Toronto, and then my family moved to the Bronx. So
oh, wow.
I was in the Bronx.
Okay.
Then came back to Toronto.
Wow. So I guess I really like Toronto then. What was the reason for going back to Toronto? Did they give a reason?
Well, no, they didn't go back. I went back.
Oh, you went back. Okay.
Yeah, I went back because, I just decided to go to college in Canada.
Oh, okay. And what was the major?
I studied philosophy because the schools I went to didn't have, film or animation or, any of those media courses at the time.
Right. So what got you into film or animation? What led you into that direction?
So So I was going to high school in the Bronx at a school called Bronx Science,
Hmm.
and a friend of mine said there's a great showing of American experimental films, American underground films at Hunter College, which was just a 15-minute walk.
Right.
Let's cut class and go.
Okay.
And it was my first time cutting class. I thought, really, should we? He said, oh yeah, we should.
Right.
And so we did, and I fell in love with those films and with that style of filmmaking. And so I started making films in high school and started showing them at the Filmmakers Co-op and Eventorium and other places that had open nights for filmmakers.
Wow.
And then I kept that up through college, and then finally decided, to bite the bullet and go into the biz.
Wow. So what were you doing live action at that time, or were you doing animation? You're doing
At that time, I was doing live action. I started on 8mm, got up to Super 8, went to
Right.
16mm,
Yeah.
and did an experimental feature film
Oh,
in 16mm.
wow. What was that called? What was that called?
It was called Voulez-vous coucher avec God? It's a comedy,
Hmm.
as you can tell from the title.
Right. The now that was students doing this, or this was people you knew, or
Yeah, it was my friends.
right.
So basically, I had friends who were interested in filmmaking. I would put together a crew, and we would do that.
And was that distributed anywhere, or how that?
Voulez-vous, it finally got a New York screening about 50 years later because the actor who was the star of the movie was Tuli Kuferberg, who was a well-known beatnik poet who was also a member of the group The Fugs.
Wow.
When he died, they had a screening of films that he'd been in, and so I digitized the film and we showed it in New York at the Anthology.
Wow, that's terrific. So how'd you get into the animation thing? Because you did the live action feature film. Did you do any more live action after that, or did you?
Well, we kept doing live action at Nelvana, but
Mhm.
happened that got me into animation was I had a friend who was working in commercials,
Mhm.
and he had a very good job, but he had previously worked for Jim Henson, and Jim Henson was putting together all the bits and bobs for Sesame Street, for the launch of Sesame Street.
Right.
And so my friend who knew how to do plasticine animation had a subcontract from Jim Henson for 5, spots, commercials for the letters.
Wow.
And he asked me if I could put together a crew because he was busy in his job and he would train us. So he trained us. We did this under his aegis. And when we finished, we all said, well, we really like this. We like doing this plasticine animation.
Mhm.
We want to continue. And he didn't want to continue. So we started a group called Laugh Arts. And eventually that morphed into become Nelvana.
Wow. When was Nelvana formed? Was that in the late 60s, early 70s?
71. So we formed Nelvana in 71. And we got the name from a Canadian comic book that had been published in World War II. And the history of these comics had been kind of lost. Nobody remembered them.
Mm-hmm.
And I stumbled upon the person who had owned the rights and kept them and kept the assets. So we were able to acquire it. And when we were deciding to form a company out of Laugh Arts, which was a loose sort of organization,
Mhm.
we decided we had been actually advised that Laugh Arts was an unfortunate name because people were pronouncing it La Farts. So they said, straighten out, get a neutral name. Don't have a name that, people can be confused by and not hire you.
Right.
So we picked the name of Nelvana, really honoring this character from 1940s comic books.
So Nelvana was it's basically 3 people, right? So it's you and
Clive Smith.
Clive Smith. I'm
And
sorry, I'm
Patrick.
confusing somebody from the music business. There you go.
Right. And Patrick Loubert. And Patrick and I had gone to university together in Toronto,
Mm-hmm.
been making films. And I had found Clive because we needed a designer when we started on our own.
Mm-hmm.
And, Carol Pope, who's a singer with a group called Rough Trade, that was a successful local group, was friends with Clive and recommended him when I asked her for a reference.
Okay, so when you form Nelvana, were you continuing with the plasticine, or were you eventually just branching out into like cell animation? What was happening?
So
there?
we started with the plasticine because that was what our reel was. But Clive had experience in doing traditional cell animation, paper animation, and came from London. And he was the only one of us who actually had lots of professional experience. He had worked on the Yellow Submarine. I think not the Yellow Submarine. Yeah, he had worked a bit on Yellow Submarine. He worked on the Lone Ranger series. Maybe it was the Beatles series that was an animated series he worked on.
Oh, okay.
Ranger. And so he brought that expertise to the table.
That's very neat.
Yeah, and so we were doing our initial stuff was whatever we could get the people would hire us and pay us to do.
Right.
It was simple.
So I'm sure it's it must have been a lot of struggle to get that stuff. Did you have any support from Canada?
At that time, you didn't get much support from Canada. It was before the support system really existed. So what we got was really just doing opening titles for a kid's show, doing some, items for an educational show, segments. And then we started to do children's films that were a combination of animation and live action. And we were able to sell those into the CBC, who is a national broadcaster.
Right.
And that kind of got us going and building us up.
Very neat. When did you get into doing like the half-hour specials? Because those were wonderful. They were original and different and magical. How did that come about? So
there were two things that happened. One was starting about a year or two before we did A Cosmic Christmas, Sheridan College was graduating their first animation students. And Sheridan College is one of the two best schools in North America.
It is, yeah.
For animation training. And, CalArts is obviously the famous one that everybody knows about, but Sheridan has grown in reputation. So their students knocked on our door and said, guys, you do animation, we do animation, we can do TV series, we can do specials, we can do movies, we can do whatever you want, because they needed to be employed or they weren't going to be animators.
Right.
At the time, there was no animation industry in Canada. It was just a happenstance that this one school that was near Toronto started an animation program, and it was very good. So, and the students were good. So we saw what they could do on some small projects, and then we said, well, let's do a half-hour special. And we thought, well, we could probably sell a Christmas special after we make it, because there's Christmas specials on every year.
Right.
So we made A Cosmic Christmas, and that really got us going. And it developed our relationship with Viacom, who distributed the show, and then distributed The Devil and Daniel Mouse and Intergalactic Thanksgiving and Romeo and Juliet and Take Me Up to the Ball Game and Easter Fever.
Right. All wonderful specials. I think at the time you put out like I don't know who it was. Somebody put out a combination of all those specials onto VHS tape.
Right. And it was called Nelvana.
Yes. And it was, I bought the tape. I remember buying it. I was excited to get it. I was one of the people who bought it.
You put a chicken in the pot.
So how did that lead in? Did that lead into the feature film? That led into, I guess somebody saw Cosmic Christmas, right? And then...
Yeah, so George Lucas was busy making The Empire Strikes Back, but his marketing executives and the executives at 20th Century Fox and the toy executives at Kenner Toys convinced him that in between movies, he should release a television special. And so he agreed to do a 2-hour special. And as part of that, he negotiated the right to produce himself a 10-minute animation short that he was going to personally manage.
Right.
So he saw Cosmic Christmas, and we got a call from the office at Lucasfilm saying, hey, George saw your show. Can you fly down to San Francisco? He needs an animation company. He liked what he saw.
Right.
Come and meet us. So I did. At the time, we were reasonably still a company that didn't have a lot of cash, didn't have a lot of credit.
Yeah.
We were, putting it together in bits and pieces.
Right.
So it was a big deal to get the ticket together for me to fly, for me to be able to rent a car, and drive out to Marin County to, meet up with George.
I would imagine that would have been a big thing. Probably was exciting, I would think, Did you had you seen Star Wars before that, or?
Yeah, and I was a huge fan of Star Wars. Like I had grown up seeing not only cartoons as a kid, but
Hmm.
the old serials from the 40s were still playing in movie theaters that had triple bills. You could see the old Buck Rogers and some of the other Flash Gordon TV series, the movie serials.
They were a lot of
And
fun. Yeah.
yeah, and that
Yeah.
was, it was those same serials that had inspired Star Wars, right?
Yeah.
In Georgia. And so I was tremendously excited. My partners were excited. Like this was all of a sudden we were getting a call from out of the blue that we hadn't, what's the word for it, solicited, and that was, going to ultimately lift us into another league, which it did because
Hmm.
we worked with, some of Georgia's top people in sound and design, and all of that really taught our team because we were talking before about how there were three of us who started Nelvana. Well, there were three of us who started it, but it was tens of thousands of people ultimately that built that legacy and the great work of the company.
Sure.
And they had the benefit of working with top Lucasfilm people. And being in Toronto, you didn't necessarily have access to that community the same way that you would if you were in the States,
Right.
in LA, Cisco, or New York.
Yeah. Wow. It sounds very exciting to me. So it was just 10 minutes of the special, or did it?
It was just 10 minutes.
Wow.
It's called The Faithful Wookiee. I don't think many people know it by the title, but it's on Disney Plus now, so people can still see it.
Oh, wow.
And
Pretty
that's
cool.
one of the things that's amazing to me about today is like things I made 40, 50 years ago are still around, either on YouTube or, on streamers.
Yeah. What's old is brand new again, I guess.
So you were asking before about the feature Rock and Rule. So
Yeah.
it
Yes.
came out of the specials. So we had done a special called Devil and Daniel Mouse. We had produced the Devil and Daniel Mouse, and that really was successful for us. We really felt that we produced something that the audience loved.
Hmm.
And so we decided to see if we could take that storyline and expand it into a feature, and it evolved over time and became totally different.
Right.
That was the inspiration.
How did the music? Who suggested the music? Because it has a lot of big, I think, Cheap Trick at the time, and Lou Reed got involved and all. How did that all come about? Because the Devil and Daniel Mouse is, it's a great half hour. It's a lot of fun, but I think Rock and Roll gets it really more sinister.
So the music packaging was, my contribution. In The Devil and Daniel Mouse, we had great original music from John Sebastian.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, from famous for The Loving Spoonful and also his own individual career.
Absolutely.
Songs like Summer in the City, You Believe in Magic.
Yeah.
Welcome Back.
Welcome Back, Cotter. Yeah.
So we decided to keep that up. And in the specials, we were working with John, and sometimes we worked with Rick Danko from the band and
Mm-hmm.
some other artists who were, popular at the time.
Right.
And what we decided with Rock and Roll, we wanted to reach the young adult teen sort of audience.
Mm-hmm.
And chose music groups that were popular with the age group, and we cast them so that they sort of were stereotypical for the part. So Debbie Harry was the heroine,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Right.
Cheap Trick did the music for the hero, the punk hero.
Mm-hmm.
And Lou Reed did the music for Mock the villain.
Right.
And Earth, Wind, and Fire did the dance song. And Iggy Pop was the demon that Mock was trying to summon up from the netherworld.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody was kind of cast to type, and they wrote their songs. So it was kind of an eccentric rock opera where it wasn't one composer, but there were multiple composers.
Right, right. I mentioned before to you, before we started this, that I was at the screening room at MGM and I think Jerry Beck was there, and I think Leonard Maltin was also there for the screening. And I was there, and I was probably sitting on the side or something. I thought it was a wonderful movie. And I don't remember, did the film go into a wide release?
No, the studio, what happened is the executive who picked it up was a terrific marketing executive named Charlie Lippincott.
Mm-hmm.
But he exited before our release, so he was responsible for the film being acquired.
Right.
And when it came time to be released, he wasn't there, so our champion was gone.
Wow.
So we did a test screening, in 5 theaters in Boston.
Mm-hmm.
And it bombed in Boston, and then it went straight to video those days, and then it went to pay TV.
Yeah, there were a lot. Secret of Nim had the same kind of fate.
Well, it was at MGM-UA too.
Yes.
Right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it was like there were a lot of pictures that basically kind of got the boot. Or they just didn't put any money into. And I think one picture, which is not it's not a animated picture. It's a Christmas Story, was one that they didn't do a great release on. No publicity for it. Of course, that thing has gone on and it's found an audience, a big audience for that thing. So
Which one?
A Christmas Story. It was Bob Clark's. Bob Clark's.
Great film.
Yeah, it's a wonderful film.
Yeah.
Well, I really loved Rock and Roll, and I'm guessing it found an audience afterwards.
It's become a cult favorite.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. So if you're into animation, Rock and Roll is for you.
Yeah. Is it available on Blu-ray? Do you know if it's out there or?
It's been out there, so I'm not sure what's the state is today, but
Okay.
it has been on Blu-ray in the past.
I'm sure people can find it.
Yeah.
So what happened after that? What happened after the feature film?
So we invested some of our own money in the movie. You know, you're always told when you produce films, don't use your own money.
I've heard that a lot. Yes.
Yeah, so we did put our own money in on top of investors' money.
Wow.
And we ended up owing, a few $1 million. And for us, that was a big deal. And
Sure.
particularly in those days. So we ended up getting private investors who loaned us money at 20% because that was a highly inflationary period, and that was the going rate for a risky investment.
Right.
We had to work it off. And then we basically went from never having produced more than a half hour to doing 100 hours the next year.
Wow.
As we worked our way out of debt, right?
Wow. So what shows were developed? I know you had there was something about Inspector Gadget starting at Nelvana.
Well, it didn't start at Nelvana. It started at Deke.
Okay.
And co-produced it and worked with Jean Chalopin and Andy Hayward, who ran Deke at the time. And we ended up, in order to qualify for the Canadian status, we ended up doing the storyboards and designs and the script writing and the post-production.
Were the voices recorded in Canada, or?
Most of the voices, with the exception of Don Adams, were done in Canada.
Wow.
Don did his in LA.
Yeah. So what came after that? So what were the shows?
Inspector Gadget got us into series.
Mm-hmm.
During the period we were working our way out of debt, we got into Strawberry Shortcake and the Care Bears.
Oh, wow.
The Care Bears became a hit for us because while Rock and Roll didn't succeed financially, the Care Bears was a financial success.
Right.
And it was a surprise hit. Disney didn't have a movie out that Easter. And they normally did, but they had just been taken over by Eisner and Katzenberg.
Right.
They missed the beat. And so there was room for the Care Bears, and the Care Bears, was very successful. And I think both Eisner and Katzenberg vowed never to leave that opening again. Right.
Right.
It did them a lot of good because Spielberg came along with American Tail.
Yeah.
But basically, Care Bears was a terrific experience because while it took us 3 years to make Rock and Roll and, cost us probably, $8 to $10 million.
Which was a lot. It was a lot at that time.
Yeah. We made Care Bears for under $2 million, and we did it in 9 months.
Wow.
And,
was that done at Nelvana, or was that farmed out to?
We did all the keys and the layouts at Nelvana, and then we went to Taiwan and Korea, but Taiwan ended up finishing the movie on the Asian side.
Right.
And then we did the post in Canada. So, it was our first experience. Well, actually, Gadget was our first experience working with Asia because that was done in part with Japan.
Wow. Right.
So we kind of learned the series business on Gadget. And then after the success of the Care Bears movie, we acquired the entertainment rights to the Care Bears and did a long-running series on American television and around the world.
Right.
The Care Bears.
Huge success. What came after that? Or were there other series going on at the same time?
Yeah. So at that time, Care Bears led to My Pet Monster, We were doing a live action series with Mr. T after he finished the A-Team.
Wow.
We did a show called TNT, which was we put him in a suit
Mm-hmm.
and partnered him up with a blonde female lawyer.
Right.
And he switched out of his suit when he went to his sort of city clothes to sort of fight crime.
I take it he did his own voice for that show.
Oh, yeah. Well, it was live action. That was a live action.
Oh, it was a
series.
live action show. Okay, I'm sorry.
Yeah. We also did something called Edison Twins, which ran on Disney Channel for many years.
Mm-hmm.
Teenagers solved mysteries with science, and that was a live action series. And
Right.
It had a minute of animation at the end to explain the scientific principle behind how they solved crime.
Oh, very neat. Did you
Yeah, so
did you find it got easier once people started to get to know you and the work that Nelvana had been doing? Did it get easier to sell shows? Because I've heard stories of Joe Barbera having lunch with a network executive and doing a doodle on a napkin and selling the show that way.
yeah, that never happened to us. But Joe was around when TV for animation or animation for TV was just beginning, right? So Joe was around when animation for TV was just beginning.
Right.
And he and Bill really began that industry, right? And
Yeah.
they developed the look and the cost and the business deals, et cetera.
Sure.
So he had a lot more access to the market. And again, we were coming out of Toronto.
Mhm.
So, Ewoks and Droids, by the way, came next after Care Bears. So Lucasfilm reached out once again. They were doing their first Saturday morning series.
Right.
We produced both Ewoks and Droids.
You said you worked with Jim Henson early on. I believe Nelvana produced Dog City. Is that correct?
Yeah. So Dog City,
Yeah.
Jim was already, had passed away.
Oh,
So we worked with Brian Henson on that.
right. Was Michael Frith involved with that show? Do you remember?
Yeah, Michael Frith was involved.
Oh, wow.
He was part of the original creative team.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah, they are and they are a tremendous creative team, the Hensons.
Absolutely. That was actually something when I was younger. I was actually gravitating toward becoming a puppeteer. And then around 13, I said, "Nah, I want to animate. I want to be an animator." So, did you have good rapport with the people at the studio, as far as your directors and animation staff? Did you interact with them?
The answer is yes. So we were a very tight knit group.
Mm-hmm.
Partly because we were all in the same age group.
Mm-hmm.
We were in the early days, we were doing, a project at a time. So everybody worked on it and
Sure.
Everybody pulled their weight.
Right.
Nelvana had its own sort of group that was kind of like the nine old men of Disney.
Oh, sure.
So we've, one of them was a guy named John Celestri. Tom Cito is quite well known in the animation community. He was there with us.
Yeah.
Robin Budd and Frank Nissen, Dave Thrasher, Wendy Perdue.
Yes, I worked with Wendy and Dave Brewster.
Oh. Yeah, Dave Brewster and
Yeah.
Anne Marie Bardwell.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
there was a group that really stuck with us a long time and
right.
Built the company.
Nelvana was originally housed and it had to be like some small offices, I would think, right? And then how did it grow during this time? How did it go from like in the 70s to the 80s and to the 90s? Was it, did you eventually have your own building? And
we eventually developed our own building, but our first big building was right on Lake Ontario. So Toronto is on Lake Ontario.
Mm-hmm.
We were right at the lake, and we were in a government warehouse that was going to be redeveloped and shut down.
Wow.
So they were renting it to us for practically nothing.
Wow.
But
Mm-hmm.
it was raw space,
Mm-hmm.
and you had to sort of fix it up.
Mm-hmm.
And there would be the smell of rancid cheese once every 2 weeks because it was a food warehouse, though that was a dying part of it. But there were people who were still warehousing food.
Right.
And the cheese guy would drain the feta cheese barrels, and the smell of the brine would permeate everything.
I'm sure that was delightful.
It gave it character. We had lots of character down there. We'd take the crew out for, a lunch or a dinner somewhere and say thank you for finishing a production.
Right.
And if it was winter, you had to worry about everybody being blown into the lake. You had to form a human chain so that nobody got swept away.
That's fun. What was like? Obviously, it did so many productions at Nelvana. Is there anyone that's like a favorite of yours?
Yeah, we've hit on some of them. So Babar is one of my favorites. I read the books as a kid.
Great show. So me too.
Passion.
Me too.
Had a passion for it.
Right.
I was born in Belgium. I had a passion for Tintin, which originated there.
Mm-hmm.
And comic books, beautiful comic art.
Right.
I had an interest in math and science as a kid, so loved doing Magic School Bus and Cyber Chase, because it fed off of, and also Edison Twins, because they all related to my interest in science and math.
Right.
And then shows like Beetlejuice were incredible to work on. I mean, we had the rich experience of working on so many great shows with so many great creative forces, right?
Right.
Beetlejuice, fantastic show.
Yes.
And working with Tim Burton was tremendously exciting and delightful.
Yeah, I mean, you work with some of the heavy hitters in the business. Jim Carrey, I believe, was involved.
Yeah.
And,
but we didn't work with Jim because he didn't provide his voice, and it was really working with the studio.
Let me guess, Matt Frewer? Was it Matt Frewer that did the voice? Or?
Oh, I can't remember who did the voice.
Yeah, because he did. It seemed like Matt Frewer got stuck doing a lot of Jim Carrey voices.
He might have. I can't recall.
Oh, that's all right. Okay. So
then we did, Eek the Cat and Tales from the Crypt Keeper.
Right.
And eventually we reached a point where Nelvana grew very, very large, and it was time to sell the company because we were making 20 shows a year and it was hard to sustain. We decided to put it together with the largest kids channel business in Canada, a company called Chorus.
Mm-hmm.
Sold it, and then I bought our nearest competitor, a company called Cinar, and turned it into Cookie Jar with Topper Taylor as my partner.
Oh, wow.
And Topper Taylor and John Vanderbilt.
Wow.
They were the founding partners with private equity partners.
Now, Cookie Jar did Arthur.
Took over Arthur, which was already there, and Caillou was already there, but we continued the series and evolved them.
Right.
And we did Johnny Test there. And we did Doodlebops, which was a live action series with some animation in it.
Right.
That was like a preschooler's first rock and roll band.
When did that happen? Cookie Jar. Do you remember the year?
So Cookie Jar was 2004.
2000.
Cinar had blown up.
Okay.
Because they had their management, the CEOs, husband and wife team, were accused of fraud. $134 million went missing.
Wow.
And so they were kicked out by the company's board of directors, and the company was in, not great shape. And so we were able to buy the company. I'd left Nelvana and focused on buying Cinar and turning it into Cookie Jar.
Wow.
And the name Cookie Jar was chosen in part to be tongue-in-cheek about the fact that the previous management team had their hands in the cookie jar. But also, it really evoked everything kid-like. So there were a lot of assets. There were great characters there because it was a good library with Richard Scarry's. It was Richard Scarry's Busy Town stories.
Okay. All right.
So, or Adventures in Busy Town. So we thought the Cookie Jar contains all the assets of the company.
Right.
And when we went to TV markets, we would bake cookies. So the sweet smell of the chocolate chip cookies, the oat milk, would waft through the convention center, and people would find their way to our booth.
Yeah, oh, smart.
It was smart, but unfair. It was unfair.
Well, you got to stand apart from everybody else when you're in a situation like that. When people come over.
So basically we rebuilt this company and made it exciting. And then we merged it in with a company called DHX, which became WildBrain. And, did some great stuff at WildBrain before leaving.
Right. did Deke, was that purchased and made part of Cookie Jar, or?
Yes, so we acquired Deke in about 2008, just before the financial meltdown, right?
Right.
It was exciting because it reunited me with Inspector Gadget.
Mm-hmm.
Care Bears and Strawberry Shortcake were all at Deke at the time.
Wow.
And so, and I had worked with Andy, so it seemed reasonable to acquire his company when he needed to sell it. And so essentially the Deke library, the Cinar library, and the library we built at Cookie Jar put us in a great position when streaming started.
Oh, yeah.
We became the largest supplier of kids' cartoons to streamers in the very beginning of streaming.
Wow.
Netflix was our first really big customer, and we helped to build that business.
Wow. Very, very neat. Are you still part of Cookie Jar, or has that been... What happened?
We sold that. We essentially merged it in with CHX, who became WildBrain and is still WildBrain.
Right.
When I left after staying as executive chairman for 2.5 years, I basically went out and started WoW Unlimited Media.
Now, what is WoW Unlimited Media? What is that all about?
So it consisted of two companies. Both of them were in trouble at the time. One was Frederator, which Fred Seibert, who's a legend in the animation business, had started. And it had two sides of the business at Frederator. One was production. So Frederator was best known for Adventure Time and Fairly Odd Parents. Footnote that Nelvana co-produced Fairly Odd Parents with Nickelodeon, actually.
Wow.
And Adventure Time stayed at Nickelodeon. And at Frederator, we produced Castlevania and Bee and Puppy Cat while I was there.
Wow.
And both of them Netflix success stories. And at Frederator had a different division which focused on representing channels at YouTube and helping creators to build their channels.
Wow.
And it's well known for its Cartoon Hangover channel, which animators generally know pretty well.
Oh, very neat.
So that was Frederator. And then there was Mainframe. And Mainframe was best known for having made the first CGI series for TV after Pixar did Toy Story, the movie. They did Reboot, the TV show.
Wow.
And they did the first Mattel animation for Barbie and kept doing it. So that to this day, they still do the Barbies. Oh, and while at Mainframe, we did more Barbies. We did Madagascar. And we did more, a reboot of Reboot and many, many other shows.
Right. Wow.
So right now, they did Unicorn Academy just before I left. And I would say Mainframe is probably one of the top-end CGI producers for television. You
retired, what, last year? Or are you still...
Yeah, I don't use the word retire.
Yeah, smart.
It rubs me the wrong way.
All right. You took a break. You took a break. Well, why don't we just say this? You wrote a book about your career and being involved with all these companies. I think Nelvana. I think all these companies. It's like basically you are the biggest animation producer in North America, correct?
I'm certainly one of them. I haven't really kept count, so I don't know. But I'm happy with what I've done. And I can say that, the test is, can I name all the shows I made? And I failed that test.
Well, you produced so many. But there are so much quality work. Because I don't think any of these shows that I've seen failed the test of quality. There was always a high mark for television.
We were inspired by the desire to bring animation quality back. Like my partners and I at Nelvana grew up with the Warner Brothers cartoons and the Disney cartoons that played in theaters. And we were disappointed. I may have loved some of the Hanna-Barbera cartoons,
right?
But I'm disappointed with where television animation had reached by the time we were in the business in the 70s.
Yeah.
And we decided that if we were going to make it out of Toronto, where there was no animation industry, there was no Burbank,
right?
We could only do it if we produced quality. And so we invested in bringing animators in from anywhere where there were good animators who would come to Toronto.
Right.
And we built the studio sort of brick by brick, and just kept reinvesting in greater and greater quality. And it's what drove us. That was kind of our North Star. And one of the things I would say to young animators today is there is great quality being made, but the tools that are available to young animators today are phenomenal, and AI is going to plus them.
Sure.
And I'm not so afraid of AI as much as I think it could be a great tool for individuals doing, animation work or other creative work.
I think when computers came in, everybody thought that it was going to be like, oh, you're going to press a button and produce an animated film. We're all going to be out of work. And I think that was a big fear back then. And now with the AI, it's like, I think they think the same way. And it's like, it still has to be, you still have to come up with a story. You're not going to let a computer do that. And, and a computer is going to be, basically AI is going to be borrowing from images and from other stories, whatever. You're not really going to get anything really good or relatable. Yeah.
And the hits are generally fresh and original. So if you look at the kids business in the last few years, Bluey is a hit and doesn't look like anybody else's show.
Right.
Peppa Pig didn't look like anybody else's show.
No, Peppa Pig is great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, and essentially the hits just, come from out of left field usually.
Yeah.
And that's not something that AI is going to be able to do. So I'm a believer that, for young talent, they're going to have this great creative resource available to them. And with YouTube, they have a place to start.
That's right.
When I was building my companies and building my career, we had to go convince a network or a movie studio to release our project and to put it on and make it available to people, or they had no access to it.
Right.
So YouTube eliminates that curator or that gatekeeper and gives a young person a chance to build a career. And using, the great tools that are available to them online, people can do some very good animation. And what I was going to say is, for those people who are, perhaps dreaming of that and wanting to do it, that they should do it with the most quality they can achieve.
Absolutely.
Because quality does win out. And, we're living in a world where quality matters.
It does. Because there's a lot of competition coming up behind you that wants to do things better. And so it's always good to shoot high. You were mentioning YouTube. There were a few people. One is a New Yorker. I think her name is Vivienne Madrano. I may have that name incorrect, but she was doing some stuff on YouTube, and now she has a series on there, and it's apparently she has a big fan following. But I believe it was last week we had on Patrick Smith, who is an independent animator, and he's won a ton of awards. He lives out in Montauk on Long Island, and he just produces film. He just produces 4-minute shorts. He puts them on YouTube, and he has millions of people looking at this. So he's creating a career for himself without working for anybody. So, that's great advice.
Well, I've seen it, working with Frederator, we saw the power of YouTube and how you can build an audience and build a brand on YouTube.
Right.
But I love the fact that there's no gatekeeper. Because if you said to me, like, what were the demons that we had to overcome? What were the dragons we had to slay to build, a company from out of nowhere, coming from nowhere with no relationships in the industry?
Right.
It was the gatekeepers.
Yeah.
And that's why George Lucas sort of reached out to us to do the 10-minute Star Wars cartoon. He sort of lifted us up into that network acceptable category that was very hard to achieve in those days. There were only a few suppliers the network wanted for animation.
Right. Yeah, and they only even if you were an animator and you had a studio, they wanted you to work with one of those guys. So it'd be either Hanna-Barbera, Patty Freeling, or Filmation. One of those guys.
Ruby Spears in its day.
Yeah, Ruby Spears. Yeah.
Yeah, but it was limited. There were like 5 or 6 companies at most that were network acceptable. When we were doing the Star Wars cartoon, the biggest thing Lucas had to overcome was that CBS, the network that ran the show, and and 20th Century Fox, who were his partner in Star Wars,
Right.
all wanted him to go with Hanna-Barbera.
Yeah.
They were local, they could monitor it,
Yeah.
they felt secure in what they would get, that they would get something.
Right.
He overcame that resistance because he had that power and he used it.
Yeah.
So I'm forever grateful.
Okay, I'm gonna throw a curveball at you, and look, you've done so much. There's so much work that you've been involved with that you don't have to prove yourself or anything like that because you're already fantastic. But if you had a dream project, I sometimes ask people this: if you had one dream project that you could do you know what that would be?
So there've been a few projects that got away.
Mm-hmm.
I feel that I've done so much that I don't feel like a whole, that there's one project I had to do.
Right.
So, I wanted to do Curious George because I loved it as a kid,
Right.
but it got away.
Yeah.
I wanted to do, I think of what else. There were, I can't recall any other ones right now.
Right.
But there were a few that got away, and I regretted it in the sense that, I had a passion for those projects.
Sure.
But on the other hand, I've produced, well over probably 125 different titles. And
yeah.
It's hard to worry about something that you didn't do.
Right. Right. I understand that. You have a book out. It's coming out next week. I think it's is it next week it's coming out?
Comes out the 23rd.
23rd of July.
But people can pre-order on Amazon.
You hear that, everybody? So
the publisher made me say it. What can I say?
So the book is basically about, I would think, your whole career, right? It's about, what's the name of the book? It's
called Animation Nation because in part it's inspired by building the animation industry in Canada, where there, as I said, there were a few shorts from the National Film Board, but that added up to a few minutes of content. Right?
Yes.
Before Nelvana. And so we built the Animation Nation in Canada, but we worked with France and other countries, and the animation teams that we developed and worked with helped to build the industry in France and build the industry in the UK and build the industry in Japan and other places.
Mm-hmm.
So we trained a lot of people.
Mm-hmm.
And those people migrated and worked in a lot of different studios.
Oh, yeah.
So I feel like we contributed to the global animation nation. I think of it on the broadest terms.
I think the Don Bluth studio had a lot of Nelvana people, a lot of Canadians.
They had a lot of our best people. Robin Budd, who was the genius behind Beetlejuice and how that looked, went to Bluth from Nelvana. And he'd worked on rock and roll too.
Yeah.
But so the title is Animation Nation. It deals not only with the building of the animation industry and the shows that I've worked on and some of the people I've worked with.
Mm-hmm.
It also kind of tells my story of being a child immigrating from Europe, right after the war, and basically adjusting to life in Canada, being uprooted and moved to New York, to the Bronx, and getting into film and television, and that journey from experimental film to children's television, which is a big journey, trust me.
Oh, it's a huge journey. And I know the struggles. I know the struggles of building a studio, because you did it, and you did it big time. But it took time to do it, and perseverance.
But it took a lot of people too. So,
yes.
I've said before, it's tens of thousands of people.
Right.
Studios aren't built by one person. You need one person. You need two people. You need three. You need 10,000.
Right.
You need that army of people who are going to go in the same direction and, work hard, particularly when we decided to focus on quality.
Right.
Everybody's got to be delivering quality. Everybody's got to be thinking quality.
Right.
Everybody's got to be challenging, each other to make it better. And we had some top talent that just drove that next layer below them to become better. And that continued on through the system at every part, right? Not just the animation, but the post-production, the sound effects, the music, the editing, every little detail mattered, right?
Yeah. Well, it sounds like a great book. Animation Nation, that's the name of it? And you said it's available on Amazon.
That's the name.
That's the name. All right. And you're the author.
Not only am I the author, but I'll leave you with my slogan. For many years, my slogan was world domination through animation.
Oh, wow. Very neat. Yeah.
World domination through animation inspired by Pinky and the Brain. Because I never thought about world domination before Pinky and the Brain.
Wow. Michael, thank you for coming on the show here. I appreciate it. I know our listeners will appreciate this, and I know they're going to run out and buy this book, Animation Nation. So thank you so much. It was a pleasure.
Thank you.
Do you have any questions or comments about the podcast? Please email Brian at Cartoonerific.com. Your email may be featured in one of our future shows.
Well, thank you, Michael Hirsh, for coming on the show here. It was a pleasure to have you, and I was really excited to talk with you about your career at Nelvana and then a cookie jar and then afterwards. And the book, Animation Nation, it's available on Amazon on July 23rd, but you can pre-order it now. So please go and do that. It's an interesting read. If you're fascinated with animation, you should pick it up. It's a wonderful book. Well, the clock on the wall says it's time to go. But before we do that, do you know that we're on Facebook? We are on Facebook. Cartoonerific Classic Animated Cartoon Podcast is on Facebook. So please go there, look us up, join our page, and there's a bunch of neat things that we put up there. We put some animation up there on the page, and we put some news and blog posts and wonderful stuff. So please join that. And this way, anytime we have some interesting stuff, you'll get to see it on your feed. Also, if you haven't already subscribed, please do so. Now, how do you do that? You go to your favorite service that you're getting the Cartoonerific podcast and just click the subscribe button. And this way, you'll always be notified every time a brand new Cartoonerific podcast or Cartoonerific news is uploaded for your listening pleasure. If you haven't already done so, please tell a friend. Now, you can share our posts on Facebook. You could share it to your friends, and that's a great way of doing it. If you really enjoy a piece of animation or a piece of news or anything, a podcast upload, which we put on there, you could just hit the share button and share that to all your friends, so that'd be really wonderful. But if you're not doing that and you have friends that are interested in the podcast and you just want to contact them directly, please let them know about us. Send them a link to the show. And tell them what you think about us. Also, and I know this is a big ask, but if you like a show and you're really enjoying the show, please say something good about it. Make a little post on Facebook or send us a comment. Send us a comment through our email. And that's Brian at Cartoonerific.com. I will get the email and then... we'll mention it on the upcoming show. So anyway, I want everybody to have a great day. I want you to have an excellent week. And we will see you all again next time on the Cartoonerific podcast. Take care, everybody.
This has been a Cartoonerific Studios presentation.
The Cartoonerific podcast is copyright 2024 by Cartoonerific Studios Incorporated. All rights reserved.